Welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this fascinating source material. Today, we're unpacking a massive macro-historical concept that has literally shaped the world we live in right now, and that is human migration. I mean, think about it. Throughout history, entire populations have just packed up their lives and moved across continents. But why? What actually drives thousands of people to abandon the only homes they've ever known? Well, the source text we're exploring today breaks down this giant human phenomenon by looking at history through the lens of an ancient text, specifically 2 Chronicles 11. So let's dive right into this. The source identifies two distinct driving forces behind major historical migrations. We've got moving for survival, and we've got moving for faith. Now, when we look at history, that first category makes immediate logical sense to us, right? If your homeland can no longer sustain you, you leave. It's human nature. But that second category, moving purely for faith, just to worship, that kind of defies basic survival logic. We're talking about people choosing incredibly harsh, completely uncertain conditions simply for what they believe. We are going to explore both of these catalysts today to understand how they've shaped our world, and more importantly, how they echo an ancient, very powerful precedent. Section 1. Two migrations that changed history. Moving for survival. This really brilliantly illustrates how survival migrations create these massive historical domino effects. For example, back in the 4th and 5th centuries, the Huns faced a devastating drought in Central Asia. So what did they do? They moved west to find grass, which ended up displacing Germanic tribes, who were then pushed directly into the Roman Empire. The source even notes that St. Augustine actually witnessed this exact domino effect happening. And similarly, if you look at the 6th century, the Gökturks were forced out by the Tang dynasty, so they migrated westward to modern-day Turkey. Both of these massive migrations shared one basic motivation, and that was physical survival. They moved because they had to eat and they had to live. But that brings us to our second category, where the motivation shifts from the physical to the profound. Section 2. In search of religious freedom, moving for faith. The source draws a really fascinating historical parallel here between two very different eras. First, consider the Pilgrims, the Puritans who boarded the Mayflower. They didn't leave England because America offered a better economy or an easier life. Actually, many of them tragically died during their first brutal winter. They left because they were facing religious oppression from the Anglican Church, and they just wanted a place where they could worship freely. The source then takes that and connects it directly to the 20th century, specifically the Korean War. Countless North Korean refugees fled south during the war. Why? Because the incoming communist regime was closing down churches and aggressively suppressing religious freedom. These refugees left behind their homes, their land, and in a lot of cases, their families, arriving in South Korea with absolutely nothing. They didn't move for immediate physical comfort. They moved toward harsh, uncertain refugee conditions solely for the freedom to worship. And the source points out that these very refugees actually ended up founding many of the massive churches that exist in South Korea today. Section 3. Jeroboam's religious oppression, the biblical precedent. So the source anchors all these historical migrations to a very specific event recorded in the ancient text of 2 Chronicles 11. Following the division of the ancient kingdom of Israel, the northern king, Jeroboam, initiated this brutal campaign of state-sponsored religious oppression. As the text says, Jeroboam actively rejected them from serving as priests to the Lord. He basically fired the Levites, who were the designated priests. And what did he replace them with? Well, he appointed his own rogue priests and set up state-sponsored goat and calf idols in places like Bethel and Dan. The source really emphasizes that this was not merely some political maneuver. This was a calculated effort to completely eradicate the faithful worship of God in the northern kingdom. And this aggressive suppression forced an incredibly difficult choice. Section 4. Great decision for worship, abandoning livelihoods. Faced with the total eradication of their faith, the Levites, along with citizens from all the other tribes who wanted to remain faithful, had a monumental decision to make. To escape Jeroboam's oppression and head south to Judah, specifically to Jerusalem where the temple was, they had to abandon everything. I mean, literally everything. Their hometowns, their generational properties and pasture lands, their entire livelihoods, and their personal safety. The source introduces a deeply resonant phrase here. It says they had to firm their hearts. You see, this wasn't just a casual relocation. They deliberately resolved to abandon every single worldly advantage and security they possessed, just for the right to seek and worship the Lord. And here is the really surprising turning point in the text. You have this massive influx of religious refugees pouring into the southern kingdom of Judah, which was ruled by King Rehoboam. Normally, you would think thousands of refugees showing up with nothing would be a massive drain on a kingdom's resources, right? But the source text points out that for exactly 3 years, the exact opposite happened. These refugees didn't drain the kingdom, they actually made the kingdom of Judah incredibly strong. So why did that happen?
Section 5. The Way of David and Solomon, the True Source of Strength.
The source text explicitly credits this 3-year period of national strength not to King Rehoboam's military fortifications or his stockpiles of food and weapons, even though he had built those, but to the fact that the people walked in the way of David and Solomon. Based on the source material, this way is an unwavering commitment to prioritize worship and faith above comfort, above wealth, and above military might. Think about King David, who worshipped even when he was being hunted in the wilderness, or King Solomon, who centered his early reign on building the temple for worship. The true source of Judah's strength wasn't their physical borders. It was the arrival of a unified people who had sacrificed everything to put their faith first. They became the spiritual backbone that fortified the entire nation. Which brings us right back to this central anchoring motif of the source material, firming one's heart. The source emphasizes that choosing the path of worship over the path of mere survival isn't something that just happens by accident. It requires a deliberate, steadfast resolution of the mind. Just like the pilgrims stepping onto the Mayflower, or the North Korean refugees fleeing south, or the ancient Levites walking away from their pasture lands. When the world shakes and everyone else chooses mere survival, firming one's heart means actively deciding, I am going to move toward my faith, no matter the cost. It is the conscious rejection of worldly comfort in favor of absolute spiritual integrity. And that leaves us with an incredibly powerful question to close out this explainer. What are we firming our hearts to protect? The source challenges us directly here. In our modern lives, we might not be fleeing across continents to escape physical oppression, but we make choices every single day. Are we too easily trading our deepest values, our time, and our faith, just to maintain a little bit of comfort and societal stability? The historical and biblical precedent we've explored today suggests that true strength, both personal and national, comes when we firm our hearts, let go of our tight grip on worldly advantages, and prioritize what truly matters. It's a really profound thought to take with you today. Thank you so much for joining me as we unpacked this incredible source material.